Imagine everything you thought you knew about the story of Adam and Eve suddenly being called into question. Now, think of a snake that maybe wasn't really a snake. Have you ever stopped to think that the Genesis account can hide something much deeper than a simple narrative of disobedience? For centuries, we were led to believe that the serpent was a great villain in this plot. But what if I told you that the original Hebrew text reveals something entirely different? Yes, what is written there can completely transform the way you understand this biblical story. And the truth I'm about to share will surprise you and free you from old interpretations. It may seem counterintuitive, but the serpent that tempted Adam and Eve was not just a slithering animal. The Hebrew word used for serpent carries layers of meaning that many scholars have only begun to unravel. What we are about to explore together goes beyond the traditional view. There is an unknown truth waiting to be discovered. Stay with me, because the answer to this mystery could change the way you see the first book of the Bible and, in addition, how you understand the decisions that changed the destiny of humanity. From an early age, many learned that the serpent of Genesis was a slithering creature that deceived Adam and Eve. But is this traditional interpretation really accurate? When diving into the original text, the Hebrew word used for serpent, Naash, carries a much deeper and more complex meaning. Perhaps what we have been taught about the serpent does not exactly correspond to the reality described in the ancient biblical narrative. Suddenly, we are faced with a perspective that demystifies the image of a simple snake. What if, after all, the snake wasn't exactly what we imagined? Something is hidden between the lines of the story, something that makes us question old certainties. When revisiting this word, we realize that Naash can indicate a divine or supernatural entity. Imagine a being with abilities far beyond those of a common snake, something with an almost mystical presence. This concept opens up a range of interpretations about what really happened in the Garden of Eden. We are not just facing a simple animal, but perhaps a figure with a much more relevant and powerful role in the story of Adam and Eve. Would it then be possible that, from the beginning, we were led to a limited understanding of the serpent in Genesis? The depth of Naash goes beyond a literal translation. When we consider its use in other Hebrew contexts, we realize that this word can refer to something more intriguing, such as a being with special or divine powers. The symbolism of the serpent in Genesis can be much more than the mere representation of deception. It may be a reflection of a struggle between knowledge and obedience. Now, the question that arises is, why would it be so important for certain interpretations that the snake was seen as just a common animal? If we go beyond the surface, we notice how the idea of a divine or supernatural serpent can alter our understanding of the fall of man. Instead of just an animal acting on its own, what if we are dealing with an entity with a greater purpose? Something or someone who defies divine orders, proposing a crucial choice to Adam and Eve. Thus, the story of creation gains new nuances. We are not just dealing with betrayal, but with a choice based on something much deeper than it seems. Here, an interesting notion begins to emerge. The serpent can be seen as a figure of revelation, someone who brings to light forbidden knowledge. Just like Prometheus in Greek mythology, who brought fire to humanity, wouldn't the serpent of Genesis be doing something similar? Perhaps the serpent was, in fact, an intermediary of knowledge, offering Adam and Eve the chance to see beyond the limitations imposed. If this were the case, the serpent would not only be a villain, but also a symbol of a rebellious and enlightening force. This new understanding of the serpent of Genesis leads us to consider the motivations behind the offering of the forbidden fruit. The figure of the serpent, seen from this perspective, becomes a symbol of something much greater, representing a challenge to divine norms and the opening of a path of free will. And how is this reflected in our own lives? All of us, at some point, are faced with the temptation to push limits, to question the rules and explore the unknown. Isn't this, after all, part of human nature itself? As we deepen our understanding of the serpent's true identity, a path opens to re-examining the role this figure played in biblical history. This brings us directly to a fascinating point. What, after all, does the word Naash really mean in its essence? Could the answer be hidden in the pages of ancient Hebrew, ready to be revealed to anyone who dares to investigate further? When we delve into the original Hebrew text of Genesis, we quickly realize that the words have a depth that often escapes our modern understanding. The word Naash, for example, is not limited to just meaning a serpent. The term can also indicate a diviner or someone with special abilities. This leads us to reevaluate what was really happening in the Garden of Eden. Did the role of the serpent go far beyond that of a simple crawling creature? The way this word is used suggests that there is something deeper at play, something that could completely change our perception of the story of Adam and Eve. The richness of the Hebrew text reveals itself when we begin to understand that in many ancient cultures, terms for animals or objects often had symbolic or spiritual layers. Naash is no different. Rather than just being a literal serpent, he can be seen as a figure with mystical powers. This vision makes Eve's temptation acquire new dimensions, placing her not before an animalistic creature, but a figure capable of influencing through divinatory powers. This understanding can even make us reflect on how knowledge and power were understood in ancient cultures. Furthermore, the analysis of the word Naash allows us to see how the text of Genesis can be a narrative full of symbolism. If the serpent of Genesis was no ordinary serpent, then what did it really represent? Perhaps it was a manifestation of something much greater, a force that defied divine laws, trying to divert humanity from its original purpose. And this raises another intriguing question. To what extent do these symbolic figures impact our understanding of right and wrong? What did the role of the serpent really mean in that scenario? Delving deeper into this question, we can see how the Hebrew text can offer us more sophisticated interpretations. When we think of the serpent as a figure with mystical powers, we open space to imagine the story of Genesis in a new light. Could it be that Adam and Eve were tested not just by a physical creature, but by an entity with forbidden knowledge, something that would put their discernment abilities to the test? This type of view leads us to question the extent to which ancient Hebrew traditions were pointing to something much more metaphysical than we initially believed. For those who want to explore the Hebrew text in more depth, understanding words like Naash can be transformative. Texts such as the Tanakh or the Talmud can offer additional insights into how these words have been interpreted over the centuries. Books that explore Hebrew symbolism, such as the Hebrew Bible and its symbolisms, are good options for those who want to delve deeper into this analysis. These texts help us build a richer view of what was really happening in the Garden of Eden and the role of the serpent. Finally, studying these words in the original text reminds us that every detail matters when we are dealing with ancient scriptures. What often goes unnoticed in a modern translation can have profound implications when analyzed in the original context. Are we ready to re-examine everything we thought we knew about the serpent of Genesis? What else could be hidden in the ancient words, waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted? The figure of the serpent in the Genesis account can go beyond a simple creature. In many ancient cultures, such as the Greeks, we find stories of beings who defied the gods to bring knowledge to humanity. A clear example of this is Prometheus, who defied Zeus by stealing fire and giving it to mortals. What if the serpent in Eden was something similar? A rebellious divine figure who dared to bring knowledge to Adam and Eve, breaking down the barriers between the divine and the human? This makes us think that history could be much more about the search for knowledge than a simple act of disobedience. This idea of a serpent as a divine rebel leads us to reflect on what was really at stake in the Garden of Eden. The fruit of the tree of knowledge would not only be a symbol of wisdom, but a key to freeing humans from an imposed innocence. Just as Prometheus offered fire, an instrument of progress and self-sufficiency, to humanity, the serpent would have given Adam and Eve something much deeper, the ability to question and make decisions on their own. This places a narrative in a context of conflict between divine control and human awakening. It is interesting to note that in several mythologies around the world, beings that bring knowledge or that challenge the established order are portrayed in an ambiguous way. They are neither completely evil nor completely good. What about the serpent of Genesis, then? If the serpent wasn't just a serpent, was it acting as a catalyst for something bigger? Perhaps his action was necessary so that humanity could evolve, acquiring the ability to discern between good and evil. After all, knowledge has always been seen as a transformative power. This concept can also be compared to other ancient traditions, such as those of the Sumerians and Egyptians, where snakes are often associated with power and wisdom. In many of these cultures, serpentine gods were seen as guardians of hidden secrets or forces of chaos that paradoxically brought order. In this way, the Serpent of Genesis could be interpreted as a symbol of a force that, despite appearing destabilizing, was promoting the growth and expansion of human consciousness. Wouldn't that be something worth reconsidering? The idea of rebellious divine figures, such as the serpent, makes us question the concept of divine order. Perhaps what happened in the Garden of Eden was not a simple act of betrayal, but rather a necessary step in the human journey towards independence. In a more symbolic reading, we can see this episode as a metaphor for the awakening of humanity. The snake, then, would not only be an antagonist, but an essential part of this process, acting as the agent of transformation. For those who wish to explore more about the idea of divine beings who defied higher orders, myths such as Prometheus or ancient texts from Egyptian mythology, such as the Book of the Dead, can offer intriguing parallels. These texts show how, in various cultures, the act of disobeying a greater authority in the name of human progress was a recurring narrative. This makes us wonder, to what extent are these stories connected? Does the Serpent of Genesis fit into the same universal archetype? Now that we have begun to see the serpent in this more symbolic and complex light, it is clear that there is still much to discover about its true nature. The next step, perhaps, is to question what this episode teaches us about the conflict itself between the desire for knowledge and the limits imposed. This is the point where the story starts to delve even deeper. When talking about the Serpent of Genesis, the traditional view of a simple act of disobedience can hide something much deeper. What, in fact, does the serpent symbolize? Perhaps the story is not just about a literal being, but rather about the human struggle between obedience and the desire for knowledge. Since time immemorial, human beings have sought answers that go beyond what is permitted or known. The snake, in this sense, could be the personification of this curiosity, this insatiable thirst to know what lies beyond established limits. She offers Adam and Eve the chance to see the world with new eyes, something that is priceless. Now, think about everyday life. How many times are we faced with choices that challenge what we have been taught as right or wrong? The Serpent of Genesis can then be seen as a symbol of this eternal internal struggle that every human being faces. Should we take the safe path, obeying blindly, or do we venture out in search of answers, even if it puts us in conflict with norms and conventions? This philosophical dilemma is as old as humanity itself and reflects the conflict between the comfort of ignorance and the risk of knowledge. The Genesis narrative also raises questions about the nature of free will. If Adam and Eve had the option to disobey, doesn't this story symbolize the first exercise of the power of choice? The serpent, in this case, would be more than a temptress. It would be the agent that awakens awareness of the power of decision. In philosophy, free will is often debated as one of the pillars of human existence. Would it be possible to truly live without the power to choose? The story of the serpent challenges us to reflect on the implications of this question. It is also interesting to think about the limits imposed by superior forces. Throughout history, we have examples of how the search for knowledge can be seen as something dangerous or subversive. In the Middle Ages, for example, thinkers who questioned established truths were persecuted for their ideas. What if the Serpent of Genesis was actually trying to free Adam and Eve from imposed ignorance by offering them the gift of critical insight? This is the kind of reflection that can transform the way we interpret this ancient story. Another philosophical point that this narrative brings up is the relationship between obedience and conscience. Was the true sin of Adam and Eve disobedience, or was it the awakening of self-awareness? Perhaps the serpent was just the means by which humanity began to question its role in the world. This awakening is often painful, but absolutely necessary for evolution. Great philosophers, such as Nietzsche, approach this transition from innocence to consciousness as an essential step towards human maturity. When we see the serpent in a more metaphorical light, it becomes clear that its presence in Genesis is not just to create a narrative about punishment. It represents the tipping point between blind acceptance and the search for truth. In our lives, we constantly face situations where we must choose between following the established path or questioning and exploring the unknown. The serpent is ultimately a powerful metaphor for this journey. This type of philosophical and metaphorical interpretation opens doors to new ways of seeing this ancient story. However, there is still much more to explore about the cultural role of the snake and how different civilizations viewed it. The question is, did other cultures also see the snake as a symbol of something deeper, something that transcends the simple act of disobedience? The serpent, throughout history and cultures, has assumed a much more complex role than what the Genesis narrative presents to us at first glance. In several ancient civilizations, such as those of Mesopotamia and Egypt, the serpent was revered as a symbol of wisdom, power, and, paradoxically, chaos. These ancient cultures often viewed the serpent as an ambiguous figure, sometimes feared, sometimes respected. In Genesis, when the serpent appears, it carries with it not only temptation, but an entire cultural symbolism that is reflected in other traditions around the world. In Mesopotamia, for example, snakes were seen as protectors and guardians of the mysteries of life and death. A practical example of this can be found in epic texts, such as Gilgamesh, where the serpent steals the plant of immortality. Isn't it curious that the serpent in Genesis also plays such a central role, defying Adam and Eve's mortality with the promise of knowledge? This parallel makes us reflect. Is the biblical account based on ancient Mesopotamian myths, full of enigmatic beings that interact with humanity in unpredictable ways? In ancient Egypt, the serpent also possessed a powerful duality. The serpent god Apep, associated with chaos, was the eternal enemy of Ra, the sun god. But at the same time, another serpent, Wadjet, was seen as a protector, a symbol of sovereignty and royal power. This cultural ambiguity, where the serpent can both destroy and protect, opens a new interpretative horizon for the story of Genesis. The serpent could be seen not just as a villain, but as a figure who defies established orders, just as Apep defied Ra. Pre-Columbian cultures also attributed great significance to the serpent. The Aztecs and Mayans, for example, revered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a god who brought knowledge and enlightenment. Just like in the myth of Adam and Eve, the serpent here is linked to humanity's awakening to new realities. It is fascinating how, in different parts of the world, the figure of the serpent always returns as a symbol of hidden wisdom and, in many cases, as a bringer of inevitable change. Another striking example of the snake's symbolic power is in Hindu culture, where the snake is seen as a symbol of renewal and transformation. The image of the coiled serpent, known as Kundalini, represents the spiritual energy dormant in each human being, awaiting the moment of awakening. There seems to be no coincidence that, in Genesis, the serpent awakens something deep in Adam and Eve, a consciousness that had hitherto been dormant. This awakening is both spiritual and existential, a shift that echoes the renewing role associated with snakes in other cultures. Snakes also played important roles in Greek mythology. The god Asclepius, associated with healing, carried a staff with a coiled serpent, a symbol that is still present in medicine today. This makes us reflect on the multifaceted character of the serpent in Genesis. Could it be a source of curse or, perhaps, a healer of souls, bringing hidden truths to light? If we look at it from this perspective, Adam and Eve's act of disobedience could be seen as a form of healing, a healing that lifted them out of ignorance and made them see the world differently. When exploring the presence of the serpent in the most diverse cultures, we see that it has always been a symbol of great depth, ambiguity, and power. Whether we are talking about Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Americas, or India, the serpent is a universal archetype that defies convention and, at the same time, connects us to something greater and older than ourselves. Perhaps it is that same serpent from Genesis, which, far from being just a symbol of evil, carries with it centuries of wisdom and mystery. Now that you've explored the intriguing world of the Genesis serpent and its complex interactions with the Adam and Eve narrative, it's time to reflect. How can this new perspective influence your life? Are you willing to question your beliefs and look at the stories you've always heard with new eyes? Life is full of snakes that tempt us every day, challenging us to seek knowledge and understand the essence of things. Remember, what appears to be a simple story of disobedience can actually be an invitation to embrace curiosity and the search for deeper truths. So, how about starting to apply this knowledge? Seek other interpretations, read texts that challenge your beliefs, and who knows, you will discover new meaning in the stories you have always known. And if you are enjoying this content and want to continue exploring the fascinating world of spirituality and hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your journey to knowledge and truth is just beginning,